It was through listening to people with all different ways of seeing things. And first of all, that's the inclusion piece. It's like making sure everyone has a voice and making it safe for them to speak up and share those ideas that may be wildly out there. And those are the ideas we need to pursue. So you're right, that psychological safety, this ability to speak up and to really hear from everybody, that's what's going to enable us to break through and drive transformation.
Hi, I'm Shannon Lucas.
And I'm Tracy Lovejoy.
We're the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to empowering catalysts to create bold, powerful change in the world.
This is our podcast,
Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out,
where we highlight catalysts that are creating amazing change in the world. In this season of the podcast, we are diving deep into the skills that make catalysts successful.
Our guest today was introduced by our mutual good friend, Justin Lokitz. And we have Minette Norman here, who's an author, speaker, and leadership consultant who previously spent decades leading global teams in the software industry, including as vice president of engineering practice at Autodesk. Her work today focuses on helping leaders and their teams create an inclusive and safe culture where everyone can thrive and do their best work. Amen. Minette is the author of a newly released book, The Boldly Inclusive Leader, and the co-author of the Psychological Safety Playbook, which I was just commenting to Minette is so eminently readable with such great nuggets of wisdom in there. So I hope everyone will pick it up. Good to have you, Minette.
Thanks for having me, Shannon.
I'd love to start off by hearing about how you relate to the concept of catalyst.
Well, I completely resonate with that concept. And I realized when I first met you, and thanks to Justin for that intro, and you shared this concept of what a catalyst is in your mind, is that I didn't know it, but in my work for many, many years in tech, and now the work I'm doing now, that's what I'm doing, catalyzing change and helping others really break through what I think is a lot of fear and resistance to overcome change, to get through change when we feel like it's too scary. And so it resonates, and it resonated in what I did. I remember in tech, I was a couple roles that I had where I was explicitly asked to transform a function or a department. That's what a catalyst does. Like comes in, sees like what's working, what's not, what are we going to blow up? What are we going to invent from scratch? What can we hold on to? And then reimagine and bring everyone along with you. So it very much resonates. And I feel like my work today as a consultant and speaker is that work of helping people who want to make positive change in their workplaces and in the world and help them get to that point.
And I think the work that you're doing, particularly around the boldly inclusive leader and the psychological safety, is so foundational, both for us as catalysts, but also to try and, curate in our organizations, because for us to be successful as catalysts, those are two things that we absolutely have to do.
Oh, it's so true. And, one of the things that I realized, and this is, I think, where leaders have this blind spot a lot of the time, is that they think they need to have all the answers and all the solutions. And like when I was brought in to drive change in engineering at Autodesk, that last role, like the ideas that we brought forward, and I'm going to say we because it was with a lot of people, they were not all my ideas. It was through listening to people with all different ways of seeing things. And first of all, that's the inclusion piece. It's like making sure everyone has a voice and making it safe for them to speak up and share those ideas that may be wildly out there. And those are the ideas we need to pursue. So you're right, that psychological safety, this ability to speak up and to really hear from everybody, that's what's going to enable us to break through and drive transformation.
How do you, I normally don't double down on this particular question, but your experience and your books are so relevant here because it's a pretty big personal shift to move from when you're an individual contributor, your domain expertise is your value in the organization. And then there comes this hopeful point of transition where what you just said is true, which we feel secure enough in ourselves and our knowledge and our value in the organization to admit that we don't have all of the answers. I'm wondering if you have any advice for the listeners about how to navigate that transition, because it can be scary for people to walk into that holding space, not knowing the answer, but knowing you'll get through to the other side.
It's so true. And it is so vulnerable. And to your point, it's most common that someone's really good at their individual function, whether it's engineering or design or whatever it is, and then they get promoted to be a manager. And suddenly you can't know everything and you can't be an expert. And it's very daunting. And that's the transitional moment that I think a lot of people just don't know how to navigate. And I gave a talk last week and I got a question from someone just about that. And he said, to your point, he said, I just took over managing teams and I really am afraid to admit that I don't know the answers. And I said, yes, that's real. And the best thing you can do is admit you don't know the answer. So it's that moment of honesty and vulnerability and like, I can't know everything that we're doing because you all have so much expertise. What I can do is listen to all of you. I can synthesize, and here's the catalyst part. I can connect the dots that maybe you aren't seeing because you're in your niche, right? And I think that can be very empowering to realize that that's your role as a leader. It's not to know everything. It's to see patterns, to see problems, to see risks, to see opportunities that others might not see because they're very deep in the details. So it's freeing, but it can be very scary at the same time.
Well, thank you on behalf of all of the catalysts for articulating that and being out there and sharing those perspectives, because we don't always have the mentor who tells us that this is the path, this is a path to being a great leader. So thanks.
Yeah. And of course I learned the hard way.
We all did.
You're making
Totally.
lots of
But listen to
mistakes.
us now. Totally. Don't make the mistakes I did. That's the point of the podcast, essentially. It's like, let's share our wisdom and you guys can make different mistakes.
Yes.
So I'd love to have you tell like one or two essential skills that have made you successful as a catalyst, and maybe with some stories that have helped you along the way, or also framing failures are good ways to sort of, garner learning. So are there times that you failed because you didn't have these skills?
Yeah, well, both, of course. Well, let me just tell, like, I think some skills that really helped me, first of all. And that part of it is that willingness to admit that I don't have all the answers and to enlist help. What I discovered when I took on a very, very large role was that people want to help. People want to contribute. That's, everyone wants to feel like they have purpose and meaning in their work. And so to reach out to people who have different skills than I have, and I think that is one of my abilities, is to recognize what I'm great at and where I need help. So for example, in this role where I was supposed to transform how we develop software, I didn't know the ins and outs of all the tools that we needed to upgrade, right? But I hired people who could do that work. So hiring great people and allowing them to do what they're great at and not getting in their way. But at the same time, because I was in a position of leadership, clearing the path, whether that means getting budget or being a great communicator and communicating to the executives so that they give us some runway and give us some time and support and maybe budget, whatever it is. So I think part of it is recognizing what I'm good at, what I'm not. One of the things I am good at is communicating. So making sure that I'm out there in front, communicating what maybe my team is working on, that they're not as strong at communicating. So again, just recognizing, I think that's that self-awareness that's really, really important. And to the other question of like, where did I miss the boat sometimes? I think it was when earlier in my career, when I was perhaps more concerned about looking smart and looking really competent as a leader and not enlisting as much help or perhaps gathering as many viewpoints as I needed to. And one time I made a decision. Of course, leaders have to make decision in the absence of perfect information. That's part of our job. But I made a decision that was fairly ill-informed. And it was based on, we were a very global team, and I put a position in the wrong time zone. And it just wasn't going to work for the people they had to work with. And someone called me out on it and said, Minette, why did you do that? This person is never going to be able to succeed. And I realized, well, I hadn't talked to the right people and I had made a bad decision and I had to reverse that decision. And at the time, it felt so awful to admit I really screwed up here. And at the same time, what it did was something positive, which is that I could reverse a decision, move this position to the right place in the world. And that actually garnered respect because the people around me saw that I listened when they gave me feedback. And they also realized that it was okay to give me feedback and I wouldn't punish someone for giving me constructive feedback. So it turned out to be a good lesson for me But at the time, it felt very, very vulnerable to say, I messed up here. I made the wrong decision.
Thanks for sharing that. And I'm just taking notes. There's so many things I want to ask you. So let's start with the first one. You're like, self-awareness, knowing what I'm good at, knowing where I need to hire the skills to support me, the organization around me. At an early age, I don't know, maybe this has changed, but like as I was coming up through the ranks, it was always like, you're the strengths and weakness finder, and you were supposed to sort of work on them both, right? Like spend as much time trying to improve your weaknesses, quote unquote. I'm wondering what advice you have for people around that now.
Yeah, and that of course was, we all had those like, here's the things you have to work on. Is that honestly, what I've learned over the years is that it's much better to double down on the things you're great at. And there are many things we're never going to change about ourselves. Like I am just not great, for example, at showing data in a really nice way visually. This is just not something my brain can do. So what do? I have people help me with that when I have to present data. Why should I try to do something that just fights against my brain and my nature? Instead, I am going to invest in the things I'm great at. So I really think that has shifted how I think about it, but also things I've learned is that for us to really just dial into the things we're already good at and say, this is where I am going to invest. I'm going to get even better at it. I'm going to learn even more how to communicate, how to present, whatever it is. And of course, I need to have a certain level of competence with, for example, with, numbers and data and whatever. But I am not going to beat myself up for not being able to do this really well, but I'm going to ask for help when I need it. I think that's better. And I think for leaders, not to constantly be going back to their staff members and saying, you're not very good at this. I want to help you, because they're just going to be so frustrated. So it's like getting us to a level of competence where we can operate and that we don't have any huge gaps, but not spending so much time and frustration and energy on the things that are never going to be our biggest strengths.
Was there a pivotal moment for you when you learned that, where it was, I mean, we sort of talked about this in the catalyst piece, but like, did you have a mentor, or like, how did you start to pivot to actually it's my strengths that I'm going to focus on, and I'm going to surround myself with people who can support those other areas?
I didn't. So first of all, I wish I had had better mentors. I didn't have great mentors along the way. So I was more observing. I was observing others and like, what did I admire versus what did I not want to emulate in terms of behavior? So that kind, which, and there's a lot of that, right?
There's
You
a
see
lot of
like,
value in that, totally.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of negative mentoring you just get from negative role models of seeing people. I don't want to behave that way. But I think it was, honestly, I think it was just over the years of sort of maturity and being in, like I was in management positions for about 20 years. And in the beginning, I felt like I had to be good at everything. I had to prove myself. I had to be good at everything, even the things that I really struggled with. But then especially as I hired a lot more people and I had larger teams, I realized, okay, this is why we have teams with diverse backgrounds, diverse life experiences, diverse skills, is that we are all complementary to each other. I think it was over the years of managing people and seeing other people have strengths that I didn't, and that they could help one another and they could help me. Then I realized, yeah, collectively, we are, that the whole thing about the whole being greater than the sum of the parts, it is so true. And I saw that after leading team after team. So really to just put all of our strengths together into this sort of big pot and see who can help with what and come to a greater result together. So I think it was really time and experience of managing teams and seeing different expertise and different skills, and that there's no one person who has everything generally.
Right.
But and when we worked, that's why it's good to work in teams and not work alone, because we can fill in those gaps.
And also, I think like one of the things that I experienced, which happily, you can design around for, is we have the propensity to hire like us, even if on the outside, sort of biologically, it doesn't look like that. Like one of my teams, we were doing one of the sort of the individual and team profiles, and we didn't have a lot of finisher energy on my team. And it's like, as the Catalyst leader, that's probably not surprising because of that bias that we have that kind of puts blinders on us. But it's also about developing the tools to make sure that we have the external structures that are helping us create the true diversity that you're talking about. Are there tools or ways that you use to create that the sum is greater than the parts?
Oh, well, yeah, and it's so true. What you said is so true that we do hire just like us. We hire the people who think like us. And I had definitely saw teams like that where it's like, oh, we are all whatever, and we have none of this. Yeah. So I think, well, one of the things that I really like to do with a group is to map out what our strengths are and what our gaps are, and to be very honest with one another. And, what are my superpowers? This is what I'm good at. Whether it's, and I don't love all these different personality tests and things, but whatever helps you get to that point.
Right.
Or just, someone once gave me a fabulous deck of cards that was, what are your superpowers? I don't know if you've seen that, but
I haven't seen that. No, that's cool. Yeah.
It was really fun. And we all took turns picking out our top two as a team and then sharing them and realizing, okay, we have a whole bunch of great communicators and we don't have a number, like, yes, you said no finishers or doers or whatever it is, right? So to identify the strengths and the gaps and to make sure that we are filling in for the gaps. And that can be in personality, or it can be in actual tangible skills, like we need someone who can code, or we need someone who can design, or whatever it is. But to make sure that we're very clear on what we already have and what we're missing. And there are various ways to do that. And then of course, when you go out and source for talent and you start interviewing, then we have to overcome that natural affinity bias of like, oh, I'm connecting with this person. Well, you're connecting with them probably because they're just like you, or they think like you, right? As opposed to the person that may challenge you a bit. That's the one you probably need on your team.
Going to your second one, you said you were, more concerned about looking smart and not getting enough input. And one of the things that we teach in the class is we sort of advise catalysts to go through 3 different tours. And the first one is a listening tour.
Yes.
The second one is a co-creation tour, and the final one is a feedback tour. That can feel really painful and slow for catalysts. And so I'm wondering how if you have any advice for knowing, like, when is it enough? When did you do enough listening, and how do you know that you did enough listening?
Well, this is part of the challenge. And this is honestly one of the questions I get a lot, especially when you're talking about inclusion and psychological safety. And I'm saying you want to hear as many voices as possible. And what leaders say to me is, what about time? I'm under time constraints. So, you could go on a listening tour for a year and never make a decision. And that's probably not okay for your business circumstances. I think maybe to start, and this I learned late, start with a time frame. Actually say, I need to make this decision in this quarter or this month or whatever it is, and then work your way back. I'm going to do a listening tour, and that can be no longer than 2 weeks based on this time frame, or 3 weeks, whatever you have. And then the co-creation, and I think to give enough time for each of them. That's where I think I fell down a lot, is like, oh, I did some good listening, probably didn't spend enough time on co-creation and ended up having to do too much alone. And then you get the feedback that, oh yeah, you missed something really big. And so I think the time is very important to set up front, is by when do I need to make this decision or this strategy or whatever it is. And then to put time boxes around each of them and give enough time to each phase, but not too much, because I think what we tend to do is get stuck in that listening phase. And then we shortchange the co-creation and feedback phases.
Yeah, that's super
At least
smart.
that's my experience. I don't know.
No, I think that's spot on. And the other thing I would just add to that, building on other things that we've just said, is being really intentional about curating for diversity on your listening tours too. The diversity of perspectives. Bring in your finance person, bring in your legal person, bring in your marketing person, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And especially because I was in engineering for my whole career, somewhere in product and engineering. And then, you do have to get those other perspectives. I remember, it's very interesting. You just said legal. One of the things that I was driving change around was how our source code policy and how we contributed to source code and everything. And it was like, oh, if I do not bring in my legal team, we cannot make this change. And we had to go to the top legal person in the company to get this change made. And it was like, I hadn't factored that in when I started working on this, right?
Yeah. So I think that's a great call for the listeners. All right. What's your biggest challenge as a Catalyst leader now?
Well, now, because I work for myself, and it's connecting with the Catalyst leaders out in businesses and nonprofits and government. It's very interesting because I'm working with all different kinds of people now, connecting with the people who want to really invest in change, and then helping them basically give them enough tools so that they can be off on their own, so that I can work with many, like, as my goal now is to have as much impact, positive impact as I can on as many leaders and teams as possible. So it's giving them enough tools and enough things that they can do on their own after I work with them, so they can then propel forward with the positive change. So I think the first challenge is finding the people, and they often find me, which is fabulous. And you know what it's like when you work on your own. Sometimes it's feast and sometimes it's famine. So then I'm like, okay, where's the next person? Where's the next client going to be? And then we connect. So it's that sort of not knowing how I'm going to find the next person, and then making sure that I go in, because of course teams have limited budget and limited time that they're willing to invest. And so what can I deliver to them that is going to give them the biggest bang for their buck, and make sure that it is impactful? And I always try to leave behind things they can do without me, because I am just one person and I can't be everywhere at once. So for example, I just leave follow-up guides and follow-up discussion topics for teams to continue to work on this material.
Amazing. How do you find the catalysts or leaders, the change leaders that you want to work with?
Well, when I first started my business, which is now a few years ago, I just reached out to everyone that I knew from my 30 years in tech and said, this is what I'm doing now. And some of them ended up bringing me into where they were working, because they're all over the place now. And then word of mouth. But what's very interesting is that some of my work now has started to come just from either LinkedIn or my website, because of having these books out in the world, because
Yeah.
people are finding both books, The Boldly Inclusive Leader and the Psychological Safety Playbook. And I would say pretty much, well, the Boldly Inclusive Leader is newer. So more of the work was coming for the first book, the Psychological Safety Playbook, but now a lot of it's coming for the second book. So people say, I read your book. Can you come do a talk? Can you come do a workshop? Can you work with my team? And often that leads to something bigger and more, longer than just a one-time thing. But even if it's a one-time thing, I'm happy to do that, because I think that can spark something. That's what catalysts do. That can spark
Change,
something. It can
totally,
spark change.
absolutely. And it's so funny because you never know what the ripple effects are. And sometimes it comes back year later, that thing that you said last year, I'm still thinking about it.
Exactly.
I'm
Exactly.
I'm curious, the self-management piece, there's an interesting conversation about sort of keeping your foot on the gas pedal. You have to have intentionality about, manifesting things in the world. But at least in my experience, it seems like if there's too much pushing or whatever, it becomes non-productive energy investment. How do you self-manage through the ups and downs of, your company creating change, et cetera?
Oh, yeah. And so much of it is just self-talk, right? Like, calm down, because I tend to drive myself hard, and, like, you're right, foot on the gas, and then realize, oh, it's a beautiful day and I don't have any meetings today. Why don't I get out there and go for a walk? And, and the thing that I realize is that when I'm not doing work, quote unquote work, is often when I'm getting my new ideas,
Yes.
when things are, honestly, I work through a lot of challenges when I'm out on a walk,
Yeah.
not when I'm
Totally.
sitting in front of my computer.
That's it, totally. It's like, oh, the default mode network. We need to give the brain the chance to go there.
Exactly. So getting out and just walking away from it is really helpful for me. And the other thing is that I have a fabulous support network of friends and family and my husband. And so talking to someone else when I'm feeling like, oh, this is not working, or I'm never going to have another client, or whatever it is, then just talking to someone and having them talk me down and
Right.
realize,
Yeah, those support structures are so important.
yes, 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 yes.
All right, you ready for rapid fire?
Sure.
Awesome. One thing that you do to be ready for a big meeting.
Well, I think there are two parts to this, I would say. Be ready for a big meeting is do your due diligence, like who's going to be in that meeting. I think that's really important. And what do they care about? And imagine, even if you don't know them very well, what might they be worried about, right? That I think is really important. And then here's the second part is you can prepare only so much, and definitely you should know your stuff, know your material. If you think you're going to have to bring in some data, have that data ready, whatever it is. But the second part is this: you get into that meeting and you just are open to what's going to happen, and you listen thoroughly, and you then respond in a way that you're going to be proud of. And so I think it's the two part of come as prepared as you can, but you can't control what's going to happen in that meeting. So be ready to go with the flow. Yesterday, I had just an example of this. I know this is rapid fire, but I was having a prep meeting for a talk that I'm giving, and I thought it was supposed to be a keynote. And I get into this meeting and find out it's going to be totally fireside chat format. And I'm like, okay. And I just adapted, right? I just had to move with it.
Yeah,
That's what we do.
and it goes back to the flexibility. The foot on the gas is the being prepared part. The
Yes,
letting go a little bit is being open to what happens because you won't be able to control it all. So
exactly.
I
Yeah.
love the natural build there.
Yeah.
All right. What is one of your favorite ways to spend a free day?
There's so many things I'm thinking, is it a nice day or is it a rainy day? If it's a nice day, my favorite free day is to go, I live just north of San Francisco, just go in the city with my husband and wander. We love to walk. Walking cities is one of my favorite things. So just wander, see where it might take us, what we might discover, who we might meet, what new thing we might find. And so just walking in the city, I love that.
Awesome. Okay, favorite famous catalyst, alive or dead, and why?
This one's, can I give two?
You can give two, yes.
Okay, because it's too hard to pick, and there's so many. I was thinking about history, alive or dead. So, and especially with election coming up, I was thinking of Susan B. Anthony, who maybe people don't study today, but man, she was fighting for suffrage. Like she was a suffragist. She was also, what I learned about her, I was reading about her recently, at the age of 17, she was writing anti-slavery petitions at a very young age. And she fought her whole life for the rights for not just white women, but for people of color to have the vote, for women to have the vote. And she just was relentless. She got arrested for voting. So I love her persistence. I love that she believed in what was right and she fought for it her whole life. So she's someone that I think was a huge catalyst. And that's why we can, one of the reasons we can vote today.
Everyone
And
should
I'm just
vote. Call out. Everyone vote.
Everyone has to vote. And then I'm just going to have one from current day because I'm a big tennis fan. I have to say that Serena Williams is a true catalyst. And she is a catalyst in so many ways, not just for how the sport of women's tennis is played. Like she brought a whole different style of tennis, but what a tennis player looked like, how she dressed, how she fought for equal pay for women in tennis. And then now in her retirement, what she's doing, like she's changed fashion, she's changed investment, she's doing venture funding for underrepresented women. And, just like she's challenged everything and been successful in it. And she's just been unapologetically Serena. And I love that. So that's, to me, those are two amazing catalysts, alive and dead.
I love that. And I love the call to be unapologetically yourself.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Do you have a call to action for our listeners?
My call to action is that even if you do not think of yourself, like if you do not self-identify as a catalyst, you can drive change every single day, and large and small. And some of it is just your interactions with others and the experience you give them, to listen to them and to acknowledge them and to be kind to them. So I think everyone is a catalyst for positive change if you realize that you have that capacity every single day.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So fun to talk with you. And to our listeners, thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about how to accelerate positive change, go to our website at catalystconstellations.com. And of course, be sure to check out our book, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out. But you should also check out the Boldly Inclusive Leader and the Psychological Safety Playbook. We will put the links to those in the show notes. And it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you.